how many brokers do you think are going to get cut just with all this happening? Just, I'm just curious.
You're listening to The Freight Break on the BCS Freight Network with your hosts, Josh Haynes and Paul Gibson.
All right, it's time for The Freight Break. How's it going, Josh?
It's going good. It's always a good day when I'm talking to you on the podcast. It's weird when we're talking about government issues and stuff because I try to stay away from the government.
I get that.
It feels like that's what we're talking about today.
Well, I don't think you can. I don't think you can really get away from the government these days, especially this last week with everything that happened with the Montgomery decision and whatnot. But real quick, BCS. It's great. Just so you know, if you wanted to sponsor the podcast, we could put your name here, or we could put up a little ad. We could actually come make it for you. That's something we do if you wanted to. But until then, we don't have any sponsors. We're not beholden to anybody except for really one man, and that's Dan. How's it going, Dan?
What's up, gents? Did Paul just admit that he is beholden to me?
Yes.
I don't know if that's the message you want to put out there, my guy.
I mean, you are the face of the Broker Carrier Summit, whether you disappear all the time or not.
Well, if you're beholden to me, then you are beholden to the entire industry, because that's who I view myself and the BCS being beholden to. So,
yeah, no, and it's great being a part of this organization because of that. I've been a part of other organizations where it's like you're beholden to the organization, and that is one thing I will say working here now full time is that's really what it is. It's like, because I've even experienced times where we're like, hey, we should do this, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's not what the industry needs or wants, and so I love that. But also we got Matt Leffler on, obviously brilliant mind. Everybody loved his stuff at the summit. But real quick before we get into that, a lot of things have happened post summit, a lot of feedback, a lot of different things. And we got some kind of new stuff going on. And I also just wanted to give you a chance to talk to the people about that here on your old stomping grounds.
I'm really excited about what we're building. BCS has always been about building community through connections. And one of the ways in which we've done that, obviously, is through our events. But also in the last year or so, we've taken a step back to look at how else we can impact the freight community. And we launched our first initiative last year with Women in Logistics, and we're launching our newest initiative this year with Veterans in Logistics. Veterans in Logistics, the core values of that are attention, connection, and retention. How do we call attention to the issues and the challenges that veterans have, whether it's from transition out of the military into the civilian workforce? How do they identify with companies and individuals in the industry that they can and will and should be partnered with or connected to? And how do we retain not only the individuals, but the knowledge base that these veterans bring to the workplace? Everybody knows that veterans have a unique perspective on everything in life, from leadership to lifestyle to ownership of challenges, stress management, whatever it might be. And so how do we retain them and the knowledge base in the freight industry? And again, make the industry better. So we have some opportunities coming up. We're currently building our leadership team. We've identified our chairperson who's going to lead the Veterans Logistics Initiative. And so I'm going to be working with them and announcing their position here in the next couple of weeks, most likely. But if you want to be part of leading the Veterans Logistics Initiative as part of the BCS, reach out to me. Send me an email, reach out to Josh and Paul. Paul apparently is completely beholden to me. So whatever you ask him to do in my name, he apparently is required to do.
This turned very religious very fast.
Yeah. I mean, hey, I don't know how far you want to take this, but
it's not quite what, but maybe, I guess. I don't know why. I guess Dan just said it, so that's how it is now. Cool. No, but we have some other cool stuff going. Like we are growing our media arm. We are looking at possibly adding a couple more shows. More on that later. And yeah, in media production and different other online things that will be rolling out soon. And ready to talk about now. If you also want to hit me up about that.
And before we forget and move on, I have to point out Dallas, Texas, October 27th and 28th. It's going to be the BCS. If you miss Kansas City, this is your chance to get there. And honestly, what we're talking about today really does prove that the relationships is what's carrying the industry forward, and to not be impacted and just be gone by tomorrow.
If you ever needed to make friends, now is the time to make friends. So you should, yes, absolutely register.
Check us out at brokercarriersummit.com. Register now. You're going to get some better pricing than you are if you do it the week before. So just do it now. Save some money.
I think it's time to bring in Matt Leffler and try to see how far we can get him from being legally ambiguous to get some answers on this current situation.
A lot of people I've seen are nervous because the brokers are looking like they're going to be held responsible. So if there was an accident, something like that happened. My question is, why has this not been a thing? And why has the driver always been the one that's just getting screwed over, and the carriers and the brokers and the people that are hiring them out that should be spending more time on safety and stuff, why are they not doing their due diligence before? Why has it just been the driver and the other people are kind of just skeeving by?
Yeah, it's interesting when you try to unpack like where we came from to see where we are, and then you can kind of figure out where things are going. So to your point, it's always been the case, if you're a truck driver and you're a motor carrier and you're involved with an accident and you're at fault, the driver and the motor carrier are always going to be the ones on the hook. So most motor carriers, and there's a lot of them, a couple 100,000, maybe close to 600,000 motor carriers, they are out there safely delivering freight on time and undamaged, and they carry about $750,000 of liability insurance. So the truckers and the motor carriers have always been the ones on the hook. What has happened is that the plaintiff attorneys are now trying to find more places to recover from. So brokers have often been in litigation, and what they've relied upon is this thing called F4A preemption. Essentially, you can't sue the broker for the negligence of the motor carrier. The broker is just connecting people together, the shipper with the motor carrier, to move the freight. What we have seen happen over the last decade or so was various federal circuit courts have looked at this F4A preemption language and came to different conclusions. Some of them say brokers can be held liable. Some circuits said brokers can't be held liable. So now that it's finally made to the Supreme Court and we finally got ourselves a ruling, now we know what's actually at stake. Motor carriers that are involved in an accident, you are likely going to have the brokers get sued as well. And they're going to ask the broker, how did you let an unsafe motor carrier into your network? So what is an unsafe motor carrier? That's the real question. 94% of motor carriers have no safety record with the FMCSA, no safety score with the FMCSA. So brokers are having to make these selection decisions with not perfect information. And that is how this whole chain of events has materialized. Now we're looking at holding third parties liable, but it's only a matter of time before you look at holding shippers liable and saying, shipper, you were negligent in selecting the broker. Now you should also have to pay this bill. So it's the same game of moving freight. The rules are now different.
I mean, and I don't know. I've always been a sucker for, the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 and, et cetera and stuff like that. And, a lot of the issues that were there that were stopped by the Motor Carrier Act of 1935 are a lot of the issues we're facing now. And so what I think it's interesting is, like brokers kind of showed up as like a middleman, as like a new thing that made sense with the market. Like they are a result of deregulation. And so it's interesting now to see, because I've always been, while this sucks for a lot of people, I've always been big on accountability going upwards past the driver, because the driver has always been the one, it's always rolled downhill on the driver. And so it's interesting to see accountability go up in an upward direction, like with carriers more now, like people going after chameleon carriers more and carriers getting vetted in a lot of different ways. And then now with brokers, So what do you think that looks like in a shipper scenario? Because I've heard that tossed around a bit.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So we first got an inclination about shipper liability when Secretary Duffy was talking about English language proficiency. So they passed a rule to make it an out-of-service event if you can't speak English. And what Secretary Duffy kind of did with a throwaway line said, we should probably hold the shippers responsible if they load somebody who can't speak English. Now, as of today, there's not a clear path to suing a shipper. There's really, you sue the motor carrier because that's the one who actually moved the freight, actually maintains the equipment. And when you find out that they don't have enough insurance, and you go to the next rung up, and that's the broker, and you're saying, broker, you're going to come into this litigation with us. We're going to make the argument that the motor carrier was unsafe and that you were negligent in selecting that motor carrier, and therefore you have some level of responsibility. Well, that same argument will likely be advanced on the shipper side. Hey, your freight wouldn't have been there if you didn't hire this broker, and that broker was negligent in selecting the motor carrier. Your point on deregulation is really interesting. The problems we see with supply chain today are mostly intentional as a result of deregulation, from 18,000 motor carriers to well over 600,000 motor carriers. The insurance number was set in 1985, which is the year I was born. Great, 85 is a great year, but I would say don't keep your insurance the exact same as you had in 1985. Probably not the best way to go. And this is the opening of the door, because what's going to happen now all across this country is litigation is going to try to establish what is a reasonable way to vet a motor carrier. There is no clear answer yet, and it's only going to be decided through litigation in the courts. So you could actually have 50 different standards for vetting a motor carrier, and it'd all be different based on each state you go to. So for brokers, their work is in front of them is going to be challenging, but we'll find out over the days and weeks to come.
Well, I also wonder too, like, because the industry has done a lot of there's a lot of unspoken things, whether it's in driver recruiting or even like when it comes to like brokerage and stuff, like the brokers who are out there already doing their job to vet things, and like a lot of tech companies and other companies that are doing things to help fight fraud. So there's a lot of work. I mean, because realistically, it's only a problem if you hire somebody who's a problem.
Yeah, this is the real issue is we don't know what an unsafe motor carrier is. So you're going to be bringing on someone into your network, and you may not know they're unsafe until after they have an accident. So if most motor carriers have no safety score, you're just kind of relying on the federal government and whatever third-party software tools you have to vet that carrier. And once we figure this out, it's going to become very challenging.
Well, that was kind of my question, because there's a lot of people who won't work with a carrier, because I've talked to a lot of carriers about it, a lot of owner operators especially. If you've never had like an inspection before, doesn't mean you're not running, doesn't mean you're not like good, doesn't mean you're not doing it the right way. But if you've never had an inspection before, there's a lot of people that won't even touch you because of that, which is an issue. But that's like an unwritten rule, like an unwritten rule of baseball or something like that. It's like technically not a problem, but no one's gonna do it. So I'm wondering, do you think a good solution might be like almost like an unwritten standard for people to go by preventatively?
This is the real question. I think you're hitting it right on the head. We don't know what the proper way to do it is. And you're going to have a lot of experimentation to figure this thing out. This is why the FMCSA and the Department of Transportation were both against holding C.H. Robinson responsible. They made the argument that they were in the best position as the government and the regulator to have insights on the safety of the asset that's being moved around for the drivers. The challenge we have, as you've identified, is there is no set standard. So maybe TIA can help build one. Maybe a bunch of brokers can work together to figure out this is what we think is the best vetting method. But ultimately, if you're a smaller broker or just any size broker, you're going to want to talk with your insurance company. You're going to want to talk with your lawyers to say, what is the process I have to do? And then once you have that process, you cannot deviate from it. It is when you deviate your established processes that liability comes knocking on your door. But it's not going to be these $1 million verdicts that's going to cause a lot of problems. It's these $100,000 lawsuits, these $50,000 lawsuits, now dragging the broker in, because today brokers move almost a third of all the freight in the United States. When this law, the 1994 Act, was passed, there was probably 5% or less of freight moving through brokers. So the industry has fundamentally changed. And as we look ahead and say, well, how can we ensure the motor carrier is safe? If nothing else changes, this broker liability does nothing to make the road safer. It just passes the liability on to somebody else. There has to be new regulation on the motor carrier level to assure that they are going to be safe when they're operating on the roads.
How many brokers do you think are going to get cut just with all this happening? Just, I'm just curious.
Yeah, there have been people that have said, it's not going to do that. There's people who have said, like, there's a popular one that said 30 to 60, and there was even one person who said 90%.
If a bunch of them are getting cut, how much is that going to change the freight industry like you're talking about? Back then, a lot of brokers really wasn't making an impact, where now, like you're saying, the industry is very different. How much is that going to shake up the industry?
This is going to be a very profound shift. So just to give an example, I've heard anecdotally of a broker who went for a renewal on their insurance. And the initial quote was one number, and Montgomery decision happens. They retract the number and they come back and say, it's going to be 300% increase. And so people are watching their liability insurance as a broker, because now you pretty much have to have it. I mean, it's not legally required, but in this environment, you got to have it. It's going to push a lot of smaller players out of the business. There's just no way they can afford to take on that kind of liability insurance. Maybe some of them will do that, but the big ones will remain big, and the small brokers and the agents may be the ones that end up losing out on that opportunity. I would say that brokers don't really affect capacity, right? So the trucking companies are still going to be there. There'll just be less brokers, presumably, to work with. There's, I think, about 25,000 brokers in the U.S. right now. So it's a substantial amount. But if we don't go and attack the primary issues, like the levels of insurance for motor carriers, the level of inspections, and the resources for the regulators, we're not going to have the roads safer. They're just going to have liability moved on to somebody else, which is not the result anyone really wants to see. They really do want to see brokers being held accountable when they do something grievously wrong, but they're not in the best position to say this is a safe motor carrier, this is an unsafe motor carrier. That's not their skill set.
So, but from your perspective, and I mean, a lot of this is going to be, like you said, like all this does is set a precedent to start setting other cases, and we don't know till those cases get ruled on what any of that's going to look like.
Absolutely. I mean, the example I give to people is when we talk about whether someone's a contractor or an employee, each state has a test that they use. They take this test and they apply the facts to the test, and that gives you the answer. Is this a contractor or is this an employee? It'll be very similar with vetting processes. Did you follow this step, this step, this step, and did you mess up one of these ones? And we're not going to have that official kind of test for many years as this litigation continues to percolate. So we've opened the doors, and it's just going to get more interesting as the days and weeks go by.
Which is also why I think some of the sky is falling. Like, this is immediate. Yes, it's something to keep an eye on. Yes, it's something that is going to have a huge effect. It's just, we don't know what that effect looks like till then. But the one thing I can tell you that it also looks like now, and I'd like your opinion on it, how hard is this going to make it to establish yourself as a new carrier or an owner-operator moving forward?
You took that question out of my brain. I was wondering, what is the level of entry going to be now?
The idea, like with a broker, especially if you're doing it right, and, already with the other unwritten rules that we've talked about like, if somebody doesn't have a score already, it's hard to even get any business, let alone now, like, you start, like, how impossible is that going to be now to, like, start a carrier or become an owner operator?
That's a really good question. I think what we're likely to see is all of the major brokers become more conservative in who they allow into their networks. They're going to look for years in operation. They're going to look for vehicle maintenance, presumably. They're going to look at any scores around the citations you've received. And again, 20% of all commercial vehicles on average at any given time are out of service. They're not roadworthy. So brokers are going to have to spend a lot more time vetting motor carriers and be a lot less willing to bring people on. And I'd even suspect that many of the brokers may require higher levels of insurance for their motor carrier partners. We've seen shippers push higher levels of insurance to brokers and motor carriers. I think the brokers are going to do the exact same thing. And it's because now they've opened up this massive can of worms. I'll mention this. Before Montgomery, there were 2 federal circuits that allowed claims against brokers. That was the Ninth Circuit, which is like California, Washington, Oregon. And there's also the Sixth Circuit, which is like Michigan and Ohio and all this. So those places you could sue a broker. But now it's opened up to every state, every federal jurisdiction. So now the opportunity for being held liable has increased dramatically, and it's going to require brokers to be far more rigid in their allowance of motor carriers coming in. And that might be a good thing. Ultimately, it's going to drive prices up, and that's the nature of safety. There are other fixes we need to still do, but this is a step in the direction of making someone else held accountable. And it's going to make it more difficult for new motor carriers to find work with brokers.
So in a question of liability, right? If something happens, there's the carrier, and then, if the carrier's terrible, going after the broker, how, just predicting, if you had to make a prediction, and no one's going to hold you to it because no one knows, how easy do you think it's going to be to get to the broker past the carrier? Because obviously there's got to be a point in some cases where the carrier is just going to it's going to stop at the carrier. To get to the broker, how frequent is that going to turn into an every time we're going to go after everybody? But how easy do you think it'll be to actually get that far into the chain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way to think of this is, if you have a claim, you have to bring it. Otherwise, you lose it. So if you're in a situation where it's clear as day, the driver for the truck was negligent, fell asleep, was playing on his phone, has an accident, whatever, you have to sue the broker if they were involved. And the only way you're going to know the truth of how much involvement or how much potential liability they have is through discovery. So that means that any time a truck is in an accident that ends up having litigation, even though, again, the majority of the time, the driver is not at fault. The trucking company is not the one who's responsible, but they will be dragged into court because there was an accident. The broker will be dragged into court because there was an accident, and they'll be doing discovery and trying to motion or move to have their case against the broker knocked out. But you have to bring the claim against the broker.
So would you almost say the scarier thing, like the insurance and stuff, is obviously terrible because that could be a nail in the coffin, like that. But you'd almost say at that point, people getting stuck with court costs and lost time can actually end up probably being almost one of the biggest things, just by amount versus situation.
So when you have insurance, there's two duties the insurance company has. The first duty is called the duty to defend, meaning they advance your costs for lawyers in the courtroom. That is the duty to indemnify. It is broader than the duty to indemnify. So duty to defend is bigger than the duty to indemnify. Once you are in litigation and there's a judgment amount, the insurance company is only on the hook for the total policy value. So that's what your indemnification with the insurance is. So if you have a motor carrier with $750,000 of liability, the insurer might just tender the policy and say, here's the money and we'll continue to defend you, but that's all of our responsibility. That's when you bring in the brokers. And so in the United States, and most of the states are like this, we have a thing called joint and several liability, meaning if one of the defendants is responsible, any of the other defendants can be paying the entire amount. So you might have a motor carrier who's bankrupt the moment that accident happens, but the broker is going to come and pay whatever the difference is if it's ultimately found that they were negligent in their hiring process. And we don't know what a non-negligent hiring process is. So it's going to take a lot of litigation. So for a lot of brokers who think this might not be anything to worry about, you better have insurance, because if you don't have insurance, you're paying those costs out of pocket. And out of pocket could be $20,000 a month if you don't do it. So there's an incentive to have insurance for these things.
Are you going to offer any free services for anybody just for research purposes to be at the front of it?
No, look, this is going to be a state-by-state type of process. So I do take on clients. I am a lawyer. I've been practicing since 2016. Since 2010. I've been practicing since 2010, so 16 years all in. We don't know the answer. This is going to vary state by state. So if any brokers out there, you need to speak to outside counsel, whether it's me or any other number of great attorneys. You want to do that now to understand what the future holds. We do preventative maintenance for our trucks and trailers. We need preventative maintenance for how you onboard motor carriers and what scales you use when someone deviates from your process. The challenge in front of all of us is you don't know an unsafe motor carrier until it's too late. And once it's happened, you're in the litigation. The asset guys have known this forever. Now the brokers are going to get a crash course in what they can possibly see on the liability side.
I will say I am greatly impressed that you said duty so many times without laughing, because, kudos to you. However, speaking of someone that is way more knowledgeable than me and Paul on brokerage stuff is Dan. We've got Dan joining with us. What's going on, Dan?
What's up? Speaking of duty, right?
Speaking of duties, you set it up, man. I was going to, and I didn't.
Matt, burning question. I know we've had the weekend. We've had the weekend to process this on the broker side of the house. There's been a lot of opinions being thrown around, a lot of talking heads, a lot of exploding heads. Burning question: is the sky falling for freight brokers? Is this the death knell of freight brokerage in the U.S.?
I would say it's not the death knell of freight brokerage in the U.S., but it's one of the 1,000 cuts that the industry is going to be facing. The entire brokerage industry was predicated, generally speaking, on not being held liable when a motor carrier commits an act of negligence. Driver falls asleep or truck isn't maintained, a wheel runoff takes place. But the question is now going to be circled further and further towards the broker, saying, what level of responsibility do you have? What process did you use to select this motor carrier? And even though we had the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the TIA, we had the FMCSA and the DOT, all of the alphabets trying to say brokers ought not to be liable, a unanimous decision has now put them squarely in the crosshairs of the plaintiff's bar. And that is going to be asking the question of, what did you know when you knew it, and how long did you practice this way? And this is going to be litigation that will happen all across the country. And over time, we'll likely have some better understanding of the exact implications. But as of right now, if you're a freight broker and you don't run with general liability insurance, you better talk to an insurance company to figure out what that might cost you. And chances are the insurers are also coming to grips with this new normal. And I suspect that a lot of brokers are going to have a lot higher prices to pay. And some of them may not survive. Many of them will, but some of them won't.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, too. I talked to my first couple of brokers in the last 18 months that told me, oh, yes, we don't carry general liability insurance. We have our bond. And for me, running a brokerage, I was shocked by that. First of all, because general liability is just that. It's general liability. It's not just covering, claims and errors and omissions. It's covering all kinds of things. So you're operating a business without general liability anyway. Maybe whether this was passed or not, maybe fix that. Just a little pro tip from Dan over here. But let's talk about that. So I know that there were two states already, California and was it Michigan, I believe, that where they were already able to bring suit against brokerages in these kinds of cases. So talk to us from a historical perspective on how many cases were brought in those states, and how many of them did the brokers get pulled in? Because I think we can use that as kind of maybe a reference point from which to launch the discussion.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we had the two circuits that said brokers can be held liable. One was the Ninth Circuit, which is, California, Oregon, Washington, all of that. You had the Sixth Circuit, which is Michigan and Ohio and all those states. Those two circuits allowed claims to go against a broker. Now, we don't know exact numbers because most of the time these things are being filed in state courts, though they occasionally get filed in federal court. But it stands to reason that there's probably several hundred, if not 1,000 or so claims out there currently that have been waiting for the Montgomery ruling. Now that we know that Montgomery is the law of the land and brokers have potential liability for how they select motor carriers, my feeling is every single time you have a motor carrier involved in an accident and a broker's in the mix, the broker is going to be dragged into this litigation. And to your point on general liability insurance, if you don't have liability insurance, you don't have anyone paying for your defense. You have to have insurance to trigger the duty to defend. And that's why a lot of brokers who haven't had this are starting to get pricing for it, and they're being blown away by how expensive it is. Like I said, anecdotally, we've heard where a policy came in and they had to rescind it based on Montgomery, and it increased by 300%. So this is not a small thing to happen. And for a lot of the talking heads out in the interwebs, many of them said that's not a big deal. It's a small thing. Everyone's going to be fine. It's going to reward the good brokers and it's going to hurt the bad brokers. But the reality is the Supreme Court does not take on cases that are immaterial. Like it takes on cases that are very profound. And this implication is profound. I like it. It's like when you play roulette. If we were talking about roulette before Montgomery, prime numbers and you might be liable, but everything else lands on it's fine. Now it's all the numbers, all the red, all the black. Any accident that happens, you are going to tag that broker in, and it's going to cost the industry a lot. And it's going to put a microscope onto the brokers to say, what is your process and how long have you done this process? And we're going to see which software companies are going to win and which ones are going to lose, because the FMCSA doesn't know who's safe and who's not safe. And so how in the world will a broker know that? I have no idea.
Well, and that, I think that ultimately is the question that it's going to come down to, is if the freight brokerages are using FMCSA data, right, the federal government's data on how to gauge whether or not a carrier is safe. In my view, as a former broker, they can only be held liable based on the quality of the data that they're receiving, right? So is having a process going to be enough? Or are we going to start getting down the rabbit hole of not only you have to have a process of vetting carriers and drivers as a broker, but you have to have a process that meets this bar, right? How is that going to play out?
Well, this is why it's so fascinating, because to your point, the government is the one that has the access to the most relevant data about a motor carrier. And the government has a lot of gaps in their own knowledge. And so if you're a broker trying to vet a motor carrier and trying to establish the process, one, you want to make sure it's in writing. Two, you want to make sure your outside insurer and your outside lawyers have reviewed it and say, yeah, this is the process. And then you can never deviate from it. Like you can't say, well, this guy or gal seemed awesome. I'm going to look past this conditional safety report. This is the thing that's going to be the most difficult challenge ahead of you. Nobody knows until an accident happens that a motor carrier is actually unsafe. And if the motor carrier by themselves was unsafe, that's one thing. But if there's some paper trail that says, oh, you saw that they had this inspection out of service. We saw this. It was like a month before you hired them. This is where we're going to see people second guessing the decision-making process of the brokers. And we don't know what is considered a sufficient process. So my hope with all of this is that people do not think we pass the liability to brokers, therefore we're safer. Nothing could be further from the truth. The only way to make motor carriers safer is to force them to be safer by higher barriers to enter and much more rigorous enforcement of the safety regulations. Without that, you're still, just like anybody else, picking someone at random who has the credentials to be a driver and to operate a motor vehicle under the FMCSA, but there's no way to know if they're safe or not.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I was talking about last week, I went on a show last week. It was talking about what this means for brokers. I actually think this might be an opportunity for brokers. The reason I say that is because the Supreme Court, what they just did, in effect, shrank the driver pool for everybody. It shrank the carrier pool for everybody. And what does that do to rates? Well, if you decrease the supply, you increase the demand. And so I think this will be an opportunity. If you're a freight broker out there and you have not contacted your shippers yet and let them know that this decision is going to result in an increase of rates, then you are already behind and you need to get on that, because not only are your processes going to have to change, but as we were talking about earlier, your insurance costs are going to go up. I would imagine the cost that you're going to spend as a broker on your tech stack is going to go up as well, because all of a sudden these vetting platforms, of which there are numerous, are now essentially required by law.
It's interesting because like one of the things that every one of these third-party technology platforms to vet a motor carrier and to carrier identification and carrier compliance laws, they're very clear. They are not in the business to tell you if someone's safe or not. None of these third-party companies want to tell you if something is safe or not safe. They'll say, this is the truck, this is where it's located, this is their insurance documentation, whatever. Here's a picture of the truck when it was driving by this highway. they're not going to say this is a safe motor carrier. No one can tell you it's a safe or unsafe motor carrier. And the challenge I think we're going to find is that many people will think, oh, the hard work is done. The brokers will handle it for us now. And I don't know that that's true, because the brokers like C.H. Robinson, who is one of the biggest brokers that's ever existed and incredibly profitable and well run, many of the cases are against them just because of the scale of what they do. And you're talking insurance by the mile for motor carriers. Sometimes it's 10 or 12 cents per mile for insurance, maybe even like 18 cents per mile. Brokers will end up paying something very similar because they're going to ultimately be on the hook for this liability. So I would say this: if you're a large asset-based motor carrier, today's decision is wonderful news. If you are a very big brokerage, today is probably okay, though you probably don't want to get punched in the gut with a $100 million verdict. No one really does. So there's going to be some challenges at that level. But for the small brokers and maybe small motor carriers, this may not be as good as you'd hoped. What I do think would happen or should happen is more rigorous enforcement of some of the driver and the motor carrier side of things. That would actually reduce capacity and make things safer. An example I like to give, which is highly controversial, is to increase the minimum liability for a motor carrier. The number was 750, set in 1985, a great year to be born, like myself, but ultimately you wouldn't want to have your insurance at that same level from over 40 years ago. So if you were to raise the insurance bar, that would push a lot of carriers out. And that's more than likely what many brokers are going to do, is just require their motor carrier partners to carry more insurance.
Yeah. So talk to us about, the small to mid-market brokerages, right? They're the ones who are going to get hit the hardest by this. What are some things that they need to be considering right now and looking into right now? Because this, we're at the BCS, we're all about practical and profitable knowledge, right? How can we practically be preparing as small to mid-market brokerages for the fallout potentially of this new ruling?
Yeah, first I'll give the quick disclaimer. Don't take legal advice from a podcast. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. And it's not me. Unless you're paying me, then I'm happy to represent you. What you should be doing now, in just general terms, you should get a copy. Make sure you have a copy of your driver vetting processes that's been documented. You want to get in front of your insurance broker or your insurance agent and say, this is what I'm using. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what I don't have in front of me. And same with your lawyers. This decision is going to have big implications, not just for your business today, but as you go off and get renewals on your insurance tomorrow. And getting alignment from your professional partners is going to be critical as you navigate this. Because if you're a mid-sized broker and you get tagged with a couple of lawsuits, it could be lights out. Like, there's no way you can survive a $10 million or $15 million verdict if you have no insurance to speak of. So those are the things I would do immediately. Longer term, I think the goal has got to be to look at motor carriers for motor carrier safety. Our government needs more resources. There's no doubt about that. And for motor carriers themselves, we need to make sure that they're being inspected and maintained properly. The fact that 20% of commercial vehicles on the road right now are unsafe is absurd. And most of the American public has no concept of how dangerous this industry actually is. But with CBS, with this case in Montgomery, it's got some of the zeitgeist. And so we need to capitalize that and use this notoriety and this moment to push for actual regulations that will make motor carriers safer. Simply passing to brokers does not solve the underlying problem that most trucking companies are underinsured and poorly maintained.
So let's shift focus a little bit and talk about the implications for those small to mid-market carriers, right? Well, for all the carriers, because like you said, 20%, I think that number is conservative. I think you're hedging a little bit. 20% plus of the trucks on the road, and who knows how many of the drivers do not pass muster when it comes to safety. Talk to us about, from a carrier's perspective, what this means for them.
Yeah, I think from the motor carrier perspective is get ready for more vetting platforms. I mean, we have a whole bunch out there today. We have RMIS, we have Highway, we have GenLogs, we have Carrier 411, we have Carrier Assure. You can list off all these different technologies. Is 3 of them good enough? Is 4 of them good enough? Like, no one knows. So as you think about what it's going to work like as a motor carrier with your largest broker partners, expect them to be a little bit more rigid when they bring people on and making sure that you are who you say you are and you have adequate levels of insurance. My feeling is it's not going to change for small carriers at all for the next couple of weeks. You're going to have the big brokers figure out whatever process they have, and then it'll be off to the races. But my feeling is it's going to become more difficult to find good freight in an environment where we have brokers now having some level of liability, unless you can do something that offsets that risk that they're going to have. And I think that's going to be higher levels of insurance for the motor carrier. I think that's what's probably going to be the medium-term impact of this.
Yeah, well, I think for small to mid-market brokers and carriers, not only the barrier to entry, but the pace of entry, I think is going to be impacted. I remember when we started Linkage back in 2020, there were a lot of shippers that wouldn't work with us, a lot of carriers that wouldn't work with us because our MC was less than 3 months old. We wouldn't work with a lot of carriers because their MC was less than 3 months old. I think that those minimum standards are only going to increase, which again will shrink the broker pool when it comes to shippers. It will shrink the carrier pool when it comes to brokers using them. I remember when we could not really find a carrier with a safety score that matched exactly what the shipper needed. There was that room kind of to fudge, like, oh, we'll put a conditional carrier on this. So there was a decision that could be made. I think that decision is gone now. 100% gone. Not only that, the documentation of that decision being gone needs to be retained for every single load, every single transaction that the broker has. So
I agree with you. I think what we're going to see over the next few months is us kind of coming to grips with the idea that we want the roads to be safer, but does making brokers liable make the road safer? I don't think that it does immediately. We still have to have some corresponding regulation and legislation targeting motor carriers specifically, because brokers are just not equipped to do this kind of stuff. They can't tell you what the tire tread depth is, what a good PM schedule is. They're very good at saying, can you move this thing from this place to that place for this amount of money? That's what brokers are great at doing. They're not in the business of being guarantors of the performance of a motor carrier. And that is, I think, the unfortunate effect of this decision is that a lot of people seem to think that Montgomery will help stop non-domiciled CDLs and English language proficiency, and it won't. That's not. Those are very small drops in the buckets of the overall driver capacity. What we really have to focus on is, are you adequately insured? Are you maintaining your equipment properly? And the only way to do that is through the government. Brokers are just not equipped to do this at scale, but they're going to be forced to, because that's what Montgomery is going to require them to do going forward.
Yeah, well, I think the implications to your point earlier, the implications will be meted out over the next 3 to 5 years as precedent is established, so we can see what kind of those limiting factors are. And again, I'm not an attorney. I'm probably using all the wrong words here.
You're doing great, man. You're doing great.
To see where those limitations are, because obviously a broker being a freight broker, just like a stockbroker being a stockbroker. Just because you recommend a stock to somebody doesn't mean that you know everything about every single executive, every single P&L within that company. It means you have a general idea and you're making your best call based on the information that you have.
Yeah, the big thing I would caution everyone to understand that brokers are held liable in cases like this under two circumstances. The first one is what we talked about so far, which is you negligently selected the motor carrier. You didn't do enough due diligence. You didn't research them enough. You didn't call the references. The other way is if you are too controlling. If you exercise too much authority over the broker, over the motor carrier, you, the broker, may be viewed as a co-employer. You might be on the hook anyway. So brokers are in this really strange position where if they do too little, they're going to be held liable. If they do too much, they're going to be held liable. And ultimately, that's what's going to compress the margin and maybe bring some brokers out of the business. And it's still very early to tell. But if the insurance renewal rates are any indication, it is going to be very messy in the weeks ahead.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, Matt. I appreciate your time. I'll have one final message to brokers. I said something similar last week on the heels of the verdict. Again, the sky is not falling, I don't think, for brokerages. And one of the reasons I will reiterate is because you are in 100% control of your processes at your company. So if you are a small to mid-market broker, if you're a large broker, continue building on your vetting processes. Just continue doing your due diligence and, again, document everything. I didn't say that. The attorney said that. Matt said on the call. So document everything. Double down on your processes. Double down on your freaking training. Documentation and processes are one thing, but if your team does not know the importance of following those processes to the letter every single time, then you're not doing a thing to help yourself. Make sure your team is properly trained. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Me and my team are available. Again, we're not attorneys, we're not insurance experts, but I personally do know a thing or two about brokerage, and I can help you navigate this as effectively as I know how to. So appreciate you guys. Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate your time.
Anytime. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Freight Break on the BCS Freight Network. And now, you're not.